Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our major stories tonight. At least 20 people are confirmed dead following the outbreak of meningitis in Sokoto State. Governor Rochester Okorocha calls for the release of self-styled leader of the Independent People of Biafra. Nnamdi Kanu describes his actions as youthful exuberance. Ethnic groups in Shagamu area of Ogun State assure police authorities of their resolve to continue to live in peace amongst themselves. And Russia's main opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, is arrested at an anti-corruption protest he organized in the capital, Moscow. For more on our top stories and others, please visit our websites channelstv.com and youtube.com/channelsweb. Watch us on the go on any mobile device by logging on to m.channelstv.com or download the Channels TV app for Android, iOS and Windows phones from their respective stores. Now, having the Channels TV and Channels 24 app will give you access to news and updates. You also have the eyewitness feature, so you too can be part of the news. Just install the app, then tap and swipe to reveal the eyewitness menu and follow the instructions to share those pictures, videos, or news of happenings around you. Speaking of which, we do have some pictures you sent in. Let's begin with this one from Mowe in Ogun State, showing electricity poles which our eyewitness reporter says have been disconnected from power source for many years now. He appeals to relevant authorities to restore the lights so that commercial activities that have left the area can return. Next is this picture from Ikirun in Osun State, showing students who, according to our eyewitness reporter, are protesting against an alleged extortion by the management of the Ifelodun local government area. They appeal to the state government to prevail on them to reduce fees paid by students to the council's coffers. Our next image is from Kubwa Expressway in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, showing men dangerously loaded onto the boot of a moving car. Eyewitness reporter raises concerns of the danger of this act and calls for it to be discouraged. We have a similar picture there from Akoka area in Yaba in Lagos. This picture shows men whom our eyewitness reporter describes as security personnel also hanging dangerously to a moving commercial bus. He wants this act discouraged for both civilians and military personnel alike. Our final picture is still from Lagos, but in Alimosho area. It shows a heap of sand, which our eyewitness reporter says was used to do some repair work on a bad road by residents. He's calling on the state government to help them with a more permanent solution. Thanks for sending in those pictures, and please keep them coming. Now, high cost of food is taking a toll on some residents of Benue State, leading to rationing of meals by the poor amidst a lack of purchasing power. Channels Television visited the popular Wadata food market in Makurdi, the Benue State capital, where majority of low-income earners get their food supply at affordable rate. They discovered the crisis that many families now face.
Benue State is known as the food basket of the nation, where it appears food is becoming increasingly unaffordable for many families who now adopt rationing as an option. Farmlands have been lost to herdsmen in 12 local government areas of the state, thereby impacting negatively on the state's food sufficiency program. Maureen Amos, with 5 other family members, now take food cart as a way of coping with the rising food costs amidst lack of resources.
Before, I dey buy this rubber 300, but now I call price the rubber they say na 700. It don't add ×2.
What could be responsible for the hike in food prices? Ali Umar, who deals in beans, and Aisha Mohammed, who sells corn and dry cassava, speaks from the dealer's perspective.
all those big men, so get money, you buy as in to drop, to store. And all those things is no good because all those poor people need to eat.
Now they cost, no they get customer like that again. Customer no they one and they come. If they call that, they know they green by, they go say the thing too cost.
In spite of the challenges, most women struggle their way through the Wadata market to find food for their loved ones. Although with little sales, foodstuff traders look ahead with hope for a better day at the market. Helena Ngebe, who deals in locally processed rice, cries out for help.
Market is hard, no salary. They don't pay workers. Person go headache go worry you. You not go get money to buy Panadol. You go die. People they die because of thinking.
While the complaints about food costs rages on, the Benue state government says it is putting a lot of resources at the disposal of farmers to encourage large-scale farming with improved yield.
The state ESCO has also approved the purchase of tractors to be distributed to farmers and cooperatives in the state. We have also approved money for procurement of fertilizer, which will be available early April.
These efforts by the Benue state government and many others could be the immediate solution to the growing food crisis and production gap and must be pursued with vigor.
Nigeria exited the Paris Club in 2005 and the London Club in 2006. Its reason for that exit is to, among others, avoid forced dependence on external sources. As an alternative, the country now depends more on the domestic bond market as its source of borrowing.
Latest figures from Nigeria's Debt Management Office put the country's external debt at over $57 billion as at the last quarter of 2016. Of that amount, 85% is owed the Paris Club of 15 creditor nations, 8% to institutions such as the African Development Bank and the World Bank, while the balance of 7% is owed the London Club of commercial creditors and holders of promissory notes. External debt stock of both the federal government and states totals over $11 billion. Domestic debt stock of the federal government stands at over $36 billion, and domestic debt of states is about $10 billion. As it stands, as at the end of the second quarter of 2016, Nigeria's external debt accounted for only 18.33% of the country's total debt stock of about $61 billion. The annual external debt service expenditure for the last 5 years is reported to be less than 6.5% of the total public debt service outlay. This, according to the Debt Management Office, is said to be a result of the country's exit from the Paris Club in 2005 and London Club in 2006. The country's strategy to avoid compelled dependence on external sources is to depend more on the domestic bond market as a reliable source of borrowing.
Well, to discuss this is our in-house data analyst, Babajide Ogunsonwo, who has been looking at figures and numbers and charts all day. Babajide, thank you so much for joining us on the News at 10. A pleasure having you here. So how is our debt profile influencing economic growth?
So there are several ways we could look at it, and it reminds me of what Adlai Stevenson, a former U.S. statesman, had said in 1952. Here's what he said. He said, we can clearly find the chart that leads to the future clearly and wisely if we can determine the path that has led to the present. So how does this connect to our debts? We need to clearly look at where we're coming from. And so in the Fourth Republic, 1999, what was our domestic debt? The FG's domestic debt, 794 billion naira. Today, it's 11 trillion naira. That is 14 times what it was when the Fourth Republic started. However, let's look at economic growth. The NBS says economic growth currently is 68 trillion naira measured by constant GDP terms. Now, that is only 4 times what it was in 1999. So we can clearly see, even though economic growth has risen by, let's say, approximately 4 times, the FG's domestic debt has increased by 14 times. And that makes us look at it that there's some good news and there is some bad news. What is the bad news. Let's start with that. Now, the bad news is the evidence shows that there's no correlation between the rising domestic debt profile and economic growth. So clearly you could see that domestic debt has increased by a multiple of 14 times. Meanwhile, economic growth has increased by only about 4 times. However, let's look at what had happened. For instance, the highest economic growth we've achieved in this Fourth Republic was in 2002. And then the economy grew by 14.6%, approximately 15%. What happened to domestic debt? It also grew by approximately 15%. But however, let's look at the fastest and highest rise in domestic debt. That happened in 2006, when our domestic debt had grown by as much as 79% in 2006. However, did economic growth happen that much? No, economic growth in 2006 was only 7%. So we can see that even though domestic debt is significantly growing, economic growth doesn't match that level of domestic growth of debt. In simple terms, what you find out is, even though all this looks like some bad news, whereby we're increasing domestic debts and it's not translating to real growth for the man on the streets, the good news is, based on the government's economic recovery and growth blueprint, they've said they will focus less on domestic debt for the next 4 years. So the plan is to reduce financing from domestic debt from 54% presently to as low as 26% in 2020, and that is the good news. And if that plan is implemented, it will free up space for private sector, for the banks who offer loans to the private sector, and improve the economic growth that the Nigerians really want.
So additional debt could help to fast track rural-urban development.
Additional debt, if it is no longer domestic, could fast track it. So what we're looking at is, which is what the government is also looking at, to rely less on domestic debt, focus more on foreign debts, and then allow the banks to free up funds, which frees up funds for the banks to support more private sector lending. Again, because the evidence does show that the increase in the FG's domestic debt profile doesn't match what you've seen in real economic growth.
So if we raise debts from foreign sources, wouldn't the principal and interest payments in foreign currency put pressure on Naira revenue?
Yes, it will. But we then now need to increase Naira revenue. And that's the challenge. So today, domestic debt is over 11 trillion Naira. However, the money that goes into the Federation account, still nowhere near 11 trillion Naira. Just consider this. If I were to write you a check for...
A real check, that is.
A real check. And I quickly put your name on this. And it's... You could read what figure I've signed for you there.
This is 27 trillion Naira, really.
That is how much revenue Google earns. So Google today earns more revenue, 27 trillion Naira, much more than the federal government. However, Google only has an employee base of less than 50,000 workers, and that's just one company earning much more than what the federal government earns. So even though, yes, foreign loans will increase the pressure on Naira revenues, the concern today and our focus should be on how we ensure that we increase revenue to the federal government, not by growing linearly, but by growing exponentially.
Okay, now very quickly, some states have received a partial refund from the Paris Club loan payments. What role do states play using debt to support funds that they generate internally?
So we need to look at how much debt do the states even owe first. Now, depending on what exchange rates you want to use, let's put it at approximately 4 trillion Naira. Majority of that the states owe is from domestic borrowing. The challenge today, however, is that only 6 states account for 50% of all borrowing from all the other states. So you've got Lagos, Rivers, Delta, Akwa Ibom, Cross River, and Bayelsa. These are the 6 states that account for half of all the monies that all the states owe. So what needs to happen at the state level is there's a need for them to increase internally generated revenue and create more products and more services that allows them to capture those that should be in the income tax bracket that they currently are not in. It also lets us clearly see that there's a lot of need for states to increase their revenue borrowing, their revenue potential, because once revenue does increase, it then increases the probability of them to take on more loans. And clearly we can't run this country by just focusing on these 6 states that hold half of all the debts that the states do owe.
Babajide, thank you so much for joining us on the news at 10. Great to have you on.
And remember to cash your 27 trillion naira check.
Yeah, right. Now, when the news at 10 returns, Art Review tonight takes a look at the works of some female artists celebrating the women folk. Please join us again.